For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy. If you can tell from my accent, I am from Australia. Despite what YouTube comments suggest, I do actually talk like this all the time. I don't just do this for presentations. I'm really excited to be back in Oslo again this year as well. This is my third time in NDC Oslo, and despite the very, very, very long trip, I really enjoy getting to come here. It's a beautiful city, beautiful country, and I really enjoy this conference experience as well. And the people that I get to meet and talk to and who come to my sessions, I really enjoy getting to come and be a part of this experience. So it's exciting to be back here. Today, we're here to talk about WordPress. If you're not here to talk about WordPress, you're welcome. There's still time to catch one of the other sessions or maybe make your own nap time instead. Who here has used WordPress? Who here hates WordPress? Who here likes but maybe still hates WordPress a little? Both options are valid. WordPress is the most common CMS on the internet, and it's commonly used for a reason. It has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. Some of its advantages do become disadvantages. One of the reasons why WordPress is really powerful and really great is because it has a lot of plugins. There are plugins to easily extend the functionality so that anybody can add an extra feature that they need. One of the disadvantages of WordPress is there are a lot of plugins, and anybody can install a plugin for any feature that they think is important for the website. One of my favorite ones is the Google Analytics plugin. There is a plugin that has existed on most websites that I've ever inherited, that all it really does, and it does other things, but all people are using it for is to add a Google Analytics tag to their website. WordPress is useful because it gives people without technical skills the ability to do technical things without needing to come and bother developers. The problem with that is we've generally ended up with some marginally overloaded WordPress websites. Anyone come across these ones before? We've got a few notices. This is very important notices. A couple of things might need updating. A few things might need updating. This is really good. I love the WordPress events and news. That's exactly what I want to know about when I log into a WordPress website, is what events are happening about WordPress in my city. We then have Elementor, because of course we need to have a visual builder, and there's a whole bunch of updates and at-a-glance stuff. Oh, and comments. I understand that WordPress comes from a blogging background, but does anybody still use comments in the sites that they're building? And does anybody actually get valid comments? It's pretty much all spam from what I know. These are the WordPress websites. Oh, I love this. WordPress guides and tutorials. That's exactly what I want in here. These are the WordPress websites that we deal with. This is why WordPress has a bit of a bad reputation. But the reasons why it gets that reputation are all the reasons why it can be really useful as well. So today we're going to go through and we're going to build a modern WordPress website. That means we're not going to use a heap of plugins. Plugins are still powerful, plugins are still useful. For example, a security plugin that needs to exist on every WordPress website. But we don't really need to have a plugin for Google Analytics. We're going to go through and build a theme, a custom theme. That way we don't end up with a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need. And the theme that originally starts off feeling, this theme is really cheap and it can do the things I want, and we should buy that because that's much more affordable than hiring someone to do the custom work for us, generally ends up being way more expensive in the long run. So we're going to go through, and anyone who's seen me around the conference today might have seen a look on my face. For this session, I decided to do live WordPress building because that seemed entertaining, and what could possibly go wrong? So, today, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that some of the things work, and we have an opportunity to turn this into a bit of an interactive session as well. If at any point you have a question, or if there's anything you would like to know, please raise your hand and ask it, and we can see if we can all take something out of the session today. So, the first part of WordPress development is, of course, the most important thing, the developer tools. If we don't have our developer tools set up, what are we actually going to do? Who here? Now, I know people don't like interacting. I know the audiences in Oslo have a bit of a reputation for not answering questions when we ask them. I'm going to ask you to bear with me this evening, and I promise there are stickers involved at the end. Custom stickers, not been given to anybody else. You're the first people to get them. Who has done WordPress development and used XAMPP or MAMP? Tried to? It's a little bit difficult to get it working. Kind of have to fight around with it. Not super user-friendly. People seem to have liked that one. Are there any other tools that people have used? Do we just have non-WordPress people here tonight? So this is a tool that I use which is called Local, which is super useful. It's great to Google for stuff. It's referred to as Local WP to make it a little bit easier. This was originally made by the Flywheel hosting company, but has since been bought out by, I believe, WP Engine. The reason why I like this is because it is much easier to get started with a WordPress website. We can go through and create a new site. We can also set up blueprints and templates. NDC Oslo. What options have we got? One of the other reasons I like this is this also customizes the name. So we get a local domain to use. Can customize how we're setting it up. I'm going to use the options that don't require downloading anything at the moment. Admin password. And it will go through and set everything up for us. This is much easier to use and also gives us a lot of really cool features once it's all set up. Once, I'm not going to sit here and wait. We can sit here and wait for it to go. But once it is all set up, here's one I prepared earlier. Somewhere. Here we go. Once it's all set up, we have a WordPress website that is ready to go. Now, this doesn't come pre-installed with a whole lot of stuff. This is just plain out of the box. Wow, that was actually much quicker than I expected. There, literally in a couple of minutes, we have a WordPress website set up and ready to go. Now, the other reason why I really like working with local WP is because it allows me to link to various types of WordPress managed hosting services. We're going to have a look at that a little bit more later, but that is one of the really useful features. All right, anyone here built a custom WordPress theme before? A couple of people? Has anyone not used WordPress at all before? Probably should have started with that one. Right. Okay. We've got some brand new people. To create a custom WordPress theme, we need to have 3 files that exist inside of the theme folder. An index.php file, a functions.php file, and a styles.css file. That's the absolute minimum that you need to get started with a WordPress theme. However, if you're like me, you can also over-engineer it and end up with a very complicated WordPress theme. Now, PHP does give us the ability to import and to require various other files, which means that one of the powerful tools that it gives us is we're actually able to break our templates up into much smaller pieces. So a lot of WordPress websites will go through and they'll have a header file and they'll import that to, sorry, I forgot to bump up the size a little bit. They'll go through and they'll have a header file and they'll have a footer file and they'll import those into templates or layouts. But we can also break this up even further into much smaller bits. For example, I could have a template part for a YouTube video embed. This then makes it really easy for me to go through and pull this in from other sections. Anybody here spent time working in other framework languages that use the component basis, like React or Angular or, okay, a lot more hands raised that time. I'm assuming, I sit a little bit more in the front-end JavaScript space. I'm assuming some of the other areas work, like C# and .NET components work in a similar fashion. When I started breaking my WordPress themes up into more bits, I found that this makes it much easier because I wasn't having to repeat myself as much. I was able to pull in reusable bits of code, and it also made things cleaner and much easier to use, as opposed with a WordPress website that I inherited from a client where their homepage template was several thousand lines long, pulled in no other bits because it incorporated the entire page. All right, let's start off with one of the useful things with WordPress as well, is menus. So are there any people here who do have to support or have in the past supported WordPress websites? A few people? Sorry. The sorry was for the cough, but I can also apologize for the supporting WordPress websites. I've done that. Actually, I still do that. Kind of made my business out of that, and at times I regret doing it. I've even to this day, I build WordPress websites that are easy for non-technical clients to update. And I know that because I built one that my mum uses, and she can update it. Sometimes requires a phone call to me, which I ignore until she goes off and does it herself and goes, oh, that's right, I remembered what you told me. It was actually really easy to do. I don't need your help. Despite this, I still get a whole bunch of clients that ask me to do simple things, like adding a new menu item. Love going through and adding menu items, especially because I have the ability to have this right here in WordPress. So under Appearance Menus, we can go through and define menus that anybody can edit. Now, these menus, we can pull in pages from elsewhere, we can pull in blog posts, we can put in custom links to social media profiles or other sections, a whole bunch of other things. You even have the ability to add icons. So, social media menus, we know. The rule is if you have a menu of your social media profiles on your website, it must be in icon format. You're not allowed to have it in text. You can't write the word Facebook on your website. You must have the Facebook icon. It's in the laws of the internet. Accessibility, to have the word, to have an icon. Yes. That's an interesting point. So for accessibility reasons, having icons rather than text, because people who have difficulty reading or perhaps low English skills or who are dyslexic are able to identify an icon more easily than they would be able to read a word, which is an interesting point. I'm also getting a few pointed looks from the front row as well, so don't worry, Denny, I am going to address that too, which is you shouldn't have just words or just icons. If you have icons, there should be a text alternative available as well, so anybody who's using a screen reader or assistive technology who doesn't see the icon is able to understand it as well. But I've not thought about that point before, but that is, we use icons because they are more easily identifiable. We can view them very quickly, but that's an interesting point of that does make things much easier for a whole bunch of different reasons. Now, adding icons is generally something that developers would have to get involved in. But there are also ways that we can set up our WordPress website so that the icons can easily be uploaded by anyone. For example, here, I have my Mastodon URL because Twitter. Also, no one has Blue Sky invites for me, so I'm on Mastodon only. I believe I've already asked for one and was told no. So here I have a couple of icons set up ready to go. I want to say you may notice, but I also acknowledge the fact that the text is really small. For those who don't notice, this is an SVG version of an icon. Typically, we haven't dealt with SVGs in WordPress, but the support on them is improving, and there's a few little tricks, which I'm going to go through in a second, that we can use. SVG icons are super useful because they're much smaller, they're much more resizable, But the reason why I really like using SVG icons over anything else is because we're able to customize the colors more easily. So I can go through and select my Mastodon icon and save. We're then going to go through and have a look at a little bit of the template for how this works. Is that big enough on the screen for people at the back? You can read that? Did I get a no? Yeah, no. Oh. Yep. I'm going to close the sidebar, but we'll bring it out again. So, I mentioned earlier that we do still use a couple of plugins in WordPress, and one of them is Advanced Custom Fields. You come across Advanced Custom Fields? A couple of people? Yeah. Advanced Custom Fields was actually built, if I'm remembering this correctly, so anyone watching the YouTube later, don't tell me if I'm wrong, I will have checked already, was actually built by a developer from Australia and is one of the absolute essential plugins for WordPress websites. As the name suggests, it allows us to add additional fields, custom fields if you would, with advanced customization. It allows us to add additional fields to parts of our website. Now, a lot of the time that's just to a page or a post, like to add a custom banner image or to get some custom information, we might use it there. But we can also add it to menu items to allow people to upload icons to associate with each of the menu items. So, the first part of that, which I can just fit it all on the screen here as well. The first part of that is we can go through. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. If you would like to know more, I recommend having a look at the Advanced Custom Fields documentation. It's really, really good, really easy to use. So, for this field group, so I have a group of fields. These are my menu icons field groups, and I just have one field in here. In particular, this is a type of image. The return format I want to get back is the URL. So I just want to get the URL of where the image is on my website so that I can pull it in. And in this case, I'm specifying that the only format I want to allow is an SVG. I don't want someone uploading a PNG as a menu icon because that messes with the code I'm going to do later. So this is how we're then able to upload an icon to our menu. What I then go through and do, nope, not there, somewhere else. Here, I have a function. What this function does is this function goes through and checks, is this one of the menus that I've said gets an icon? I pull this in at icon menus. I then want to loop through each of the items in my menu, and I want to actually get the icon here. So I want to get that icon. I then have a little utility function called inline SVG. We could talk through that if we wanted, but as the name suggests, it's going to fetch an SVG file and inline the contents of the SVG for me. I'm then able to change the menu item title, which is typically the text. I change that to be an icon, and then I wrap the existing title in a span. What I'm then able to do, if we're going to keep our fingers crossed for my website. Everyone got their fingers crossed? We're going to know if you don't. If this doesn't work, it's because someone didn't cross their fingers. And not remotely because technology has not been my friend this week. So what this should do is this should mean that somewhere around here, in the bottom corner of our website, as you can see, this is a beautiful website as well. My intention for today was to make it a little bit nicer and cleaner and give you something pretty to look at while I talked about WordPress, but instead WordPress decided to throw a tantrum. WordPress decided not to work at all today. So I got to spend today completely rewriting the overly complicated WordPress setup that I have to try... Yes. WordPress is super useful, but WordPress still has its moments. Someone suggested that I should just do a bait and switch and turn this talk into WordPress sucks, don't use it. But we're going to give it a go. I'm going to put this over to the side out of the screen. Apparently it thinks my screen's over here. I'm going to put this to the side out of the screen, and we're going to go through and hope that that might reload at some point. It says it's doing stuff, but I don't quite believe it. Yeah, that's not quite better. All right. So, in theory, we can add icons to our menu items. If anybody does actually have questions at the end, I can give you some links to GitHub repos of WordPress custom themes that do function and do work if you'd like to refer back to code. I would have used them today, but they're clients' websites, and I didn't have a chance to check with them beforehand, if that was okay. So, one of the other useful parts of WordPress are widgets. We love widgets. Widgets are great. Widgets are actually super useful because they allow us to define sections of a page, and we can then put content inside of it. So a little bit like, anybody here done any development with Vue or Astro and done slots? Wow, we've got a lot of people in here from that space. Similar to slots, widgets allow us to define a widget area, and we can then pull any content that people put into that area. So a lot of that was sidebars or sections in the footer and stuff like that. In this example, I have an acknowledgement of country section. So in Australia, a lot of our websites, we have an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And so I added a section so that my clients could go through and update the content of that section as they needed to without needing to come and talk to me. It's useful. I use it in another website for a client that is a doctor's surgery. And last couple of years, sometimes things happen, and sometimes they needed to have very loud, obnoxious pop-ups on, like they did literally need to have loud, obnoxious pop-ups on their website to let their patients know what was changing and what they needed to be aware of before they came in. So by adding a widget section, for the most part, it was empty, but when things changed, they were able to go in and easily update the content so that it appeared on the website. Now, widgets, we'll come back to that in a second. Now, Widgets, as they are now known, have previously been known as sidebars. So the function still exists to register a sidebar. We go through, and I'll have a look at the code for the widget in a second. But we go through and register the sidebar, and there's a whole bunch of information that we can put in there. What I'm pretty much doing here is I'm just going through and wrapping it in a div so that I can control that afterwards. If I then have a look at the widget itself, we give the widget a name and an ID, which is what we use to pull in the information. Now, because of the history that widgets have had with WordPress, they will also add a title at the top of them, which is great because I never want a title at the top of my widget because I'm using the functionality for something different. So, I have a little hack. The great thing is if there's ever something you want to customize about WordPress, there's probably a code snippet somewhere on the internet you can use. This is a little hack which hides the widget title. Widget title doesn't appear, it doesn't exist. What I can then go through and do, which I'm pretty sure my widget exists in the footer. It does. So I can go through and have a look here. Here, when I want to put my widget on the page, the first thing I do is I go through and check, is this active? Is this widget area active? Because this is part, you can define these in plugins or in themes, so sometimes you have issues and you need to make sure that first it exists, otherwise you get a whole bunch of PHP errors on your page. We can have a look at a few of them in a second because my website's showing some excellent ones. The next, we go through and we pull in the dynamic sidebar, which is our widget. So using this, we're able to add some custom content sections so that people can add more content in the page wherever they're going to need it. Now, this is really useful for a wide range of other sections. Like, anybody here built a website with a whole bunch of logos at the bottom? Or just like some logos in the footer, like associations or certifications, things like that. This is where widgets are really useful because we're able to have a section that appears wherever we need it to, but give the ability for our users to make the changes themselves. All right. Anyone have any questions about WordPress in the meantime? Yep.
You're showing the code here.
Yep.
Do you recommend to change the code in order to use the widgets? Because WordPress keeps updating every week. If we do some changes in the code, then
Yep. Yeah. So my understanding is, should I change the code and do it differently? Because WordPress keeps changing it. This is something that we need to take into account. It's, as you said, WordPress does keep updating. However, these kinds of, so I'm using WordPress functions to just pull in the information. These functions are fairly core features of WordPress. So although they are changing how one of these worked would be a massive breaking change. And so that would be something we'd be aware of. That's why it's really important. So when we go through and run WordPress updates, by we, I mean my wonderful contractor who works for me so that I don't have to do WordPress updates. We go through and perform it first on a staging website. We update everything, make sure it all works, and then perform it on the live website. So if something like that happened and one of these functions or anything else that we used had changed, which broke the website, gives us an opportunity to go back and update the theme. This is why creating custom themes does add that additional step of because we've built the theme, it does mean we then need to keep on top of what WordPress changes to make sure that it continues to stay up to date. However, even paid themes, there are a lot of developers that go through and do it, but there are still often times when things aren't caught beforehand. I've gone through and updated WordPress websites that used a paid theme where I had a whole bunch of compatibility issues and things had broken. So that kind of thing's always going to be a risk. It just depends on, am I going to have to contact a developer to see if they can help me out with a fix for it, or do I have control of the theme that I've built and can go through and just update the fix myself. The websites that we build as well are relatively, they're not over the top complicated with a lot of this stuff too. So most of the time when we have issues is around more advanced functionality. For example, I think the last time we had issues with updates was a website that does event ticketing through their website, and we did do some funky custom stuff with the event ticketing. So when we updated to the new major version of the plugin, there was work to go through and do there. If that answers your question. Yeah. Question at the back there?
I never worked with WordPress. Maybe like 12 years ago I worked with a blog or something. But my question is are there any plugins to replace this PHP code with like JSX or React or something like that? Or maybe put in Vue or whatever in there?
Are there any plugins to replace PHP with JSX or React or Vue? There are definitely ones. I think PHP's always kind of got to sit in there a little bit just as a legacy thing, but there is a lot more changes, so we can have a look in a second. The new WordPress editor is much more React based than PHP based. I'm also getting a hand raised over here, which I think Denny had something to add.
I think it has also an additional question on the PHP stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a way of making this kind of, so what I'm doing right now is for my customers is just making and configuring nice WordPress websites with existing tools, so without coding it. That's the way that I didn't raise my hand a lot. Have you asked, did you code it? Because to be honest, I hate PHP. Is there a way to make that stuff without PHP? To be very brutally honest. I don't have a feeling with it.
See,
what can I do?
See, that viewpoint's really funny because I'm similar. I'm not a huge fan of PHP, but I talked to a few people before the conference and they were like, what's your talk on? And I said, well, I'm doing WordPress. And I expected that, WordPress, does anyone even use it? And the few people I managed to talk to were PHP developers. They're like, oh my goodness, you're doing PHP? A non-JavaScript talk. This is amazing. So it's nice to see somebody else who doesn't like PHP, and apparently a whole room. The PHP people seems to not actually be in this room, which is interesting. I can't offer, so trying not to have to edit the code as well, and trying to just do more from the dashboard side of things. I can't give too much advice in that space because I'm kind of the opposite. I prefer to do as much as I can in the code so that I don't have to deal with the dashboard. So probably the one thing that would make things easier is leaning more into the side of the Gutenberg editor, which we're going to look at a little bit in a minute, because there are a lot more plugins and extensions now for custom sections and blocks, so you can have that visual builder experience but in a much more lightweight space, especially that building experience is now expanding to more parts of the WordPress website as well. So the widget sections use the builder as well, and they're doing Gutenberg visual blocks across the entirety of websites now too. So I think that's definitely going to be where your your best bet of staying out of the PHP code. Yeah. So, what do I actually mean for those who aren't familiar with Gutenberg? When the page loads. Gutenberg is, I always refer to it as the new editor, but I'm pretty sure it came out like 8 years ago or something. It's been around for quite a while now. It's a WordPress's visual editor. Now, I'm not talking about a visual page builder. Anyone here use WordPress with a visual page builder? You've got your Elementors and your Divies and your Beaver Builder, and there's probably anybody else have one they've used? Wow, not many. I think it's just you, Denny. So these visual page builders have given the ability for the non-technical users or the people who don't want to use who don't want to get into the code and use PHP to make more complex changes to the content on the website. The problem with these, in a lot of cases, and I'm not trying to be negative, I just have opinions about them, is the code that they spit out is not spectacular, overly complex, overly cluttered, and a complete and utter pain to deal with. They also do one of the things that I've seen a lot of WordPress theme and plugin developers do, which I absolutely despise, which is create overly specific, complicated styles, overuse bang important to make sure their styles always exist, which mean if I want to override them, I have to do things I don't like to do with CSS. So, I was a little bit concerned when Gutenberg editor came out, and there are definitely some things that are still not great. So from a person viewing the website perspective, there's not too many issues. The code it generates is nice and clean and does give a nice, it gives a nice modern look to the website. From an editing experience, I enjoy it. I think it's useful. I know a lot of people who do find that it's a good editing experience. However, there are accessibility issues with the editor. So I know there are still concerns, and there are some points there that they're working on. Sorry, was there a question at the back there? How about SEO? There are no issues with SEO as far as I'm concerned. WordPress still very much seems to top out as the number one choice for SEO. I'm working on, when I get back from holiday, I will be working on a project for, I've been contracted for an SEO company, for a company that's hired them, and they were like, we want to build a website, we think it should be WordPress. And we sat down and had a look, and I went, well, actually, I think you'd be better off with static, and we can bring in a headless CMS. And there are a lot of concerns around moving away from WordPress because that's everything they use, that's everything they know. There are so many features, and the control over the SEO of pages, particularly with plugins being able to analyze the content on a page and to provide reviews of whether or not there are improvements that can be made. WordPress is still very much at the front there. I have managed to pull them away from WordPress though, with the promise that it's not going to affect the SEO and they're still going to be able to edit the metadata. So, this is the WordPress Gutenberg editor. And I've clicked this remind me later thing like 20 times today, and every time it goes, we'll remind you in 12 hours. and then 3 minutes later it pops up again. But I'm not going to uninstall it because WordFence exists on every website I build, because every time I inherit a website that doesn't have a security plugin, see, I will be reminded again in 12 hours. Let's count how long it takes. As I said, out of the plugins that get installed on a website, a security plugin should always be there. We talked about WordPress being the #1 used CMS on the internet. Does anyone know what that then means? Why is it an issue that it's the #1 CMS on the internet? It's the #1 CMS to target. We all know what the code looks like, we know where the vulnerabilities are, and when things aren't kept up to date, there are windows left open that people can get in through. So security plugins exist for a reason. Which security plugin do I recommend? I use WordFence. However, I'm going to very carefully not make a recommendation. Sorry. Because I believe that it depends on the use case. I use that because I'm also aware of the fact that the websites that I'm building don't actually have any data that would be of concern if it was compromised. It depends heavily on what you've got. So if I have a nice brochure website where if they hack in, they could, I don't know, view the content that was on the website. That is less of a concern. But if I have an online store where if someone hacks in, they can access people's credit card information and phone numbers and mailing address and, you know, all of that information the Australian government would call non-personally identifying. Sorry, it's a bit more of an Australian joke. That kind of website, I would be doing a lot of research on what's going on, what I need to be protecting for, and probably looking at multiple options. So not just having a security plugin, keeping in mind the hosting, what you've got going on at the hosting, for various other things. Like I've had a website get DDoSed before. They didn't actually have anything secure on there, but someone just decided to DDoS the website. So those kinds of things we need to be taking into account, and what steps you can take, probably a few of them. The other one, from a security perspective, the other #1 thing, can I have two #1 things for security? The other #1 thing that I would recommend from a security perspective is making sure things are kept up to date, because that's where we have issues, is when we have websites like we looked at the start with 56 out-of-date plugins. Because as soon as those security flaws are found, people are going to start looking for them everywhere. I'll give this one a #2. #2 is making sure that users are being secure. So the last time I had issues with a website getting hacked, it was not a website I built. It was a website that a client had, and I was building a new one to replace it. And right before we went live, their old website got hacked because they had one admin account. The admin account wasn't admin, but it was the name of the company. And the password was shared internally in their company through a Google Doc. I'm going to leave the security people in the front of the room to just feel a little bit ill at that one. So that's where our biggest issues are. One of the features I like about WordFence is it does give the ability to have multi-factor authentication on user accounts. So having that multi-factor authentication, I'm very clear with my clients that we don't share user accounts. Everyone gets their own. Passwords need to be secure, and passwords don't get shared around. So, yeah, if that answers the question. Yep. Cool. All right, so the WordPress Gutenberg editor is kind of, it's a visual block builder, but it gives much cleaner code. This code, sorry, there's like an international setting somewhere on my keyboard, but I don't know what it is. This code is so clean. It gives much cleaner code than a lot of the other visual builders have. It also is very low on the style front, so it gives just enough styles to get it to look the way it should. It's much easier for us to go through, to be able to go through and customize it the way we would. So that kind of thing is really useful. I know we're running short on time, but I did promise, based on the fact that we've got a whole bunch of JavaScript people in the room, I'm assuming you're all here to know how you can do React with WordPress. So we should probably have a bit of a look at React with WordPress. So the Gutenberg editor, which we just looked at, there are a couple of different ways you can create blocks. You can, guess what? You can install a plugin for it. You can install a plugin, or Advanced Custom Fields has the ability to go through and do that. That's what I use for most of my clients' websites. Or you can build React. So this is an example of a React Gutenberg block. I have two functions in here. There is an edit function and a save function. The edit function gives me the editor that people will be able to go through and edit the content that's pulled in from the block. So here I can pull in a title, they can edit a title and content. There's then also here, we've given them some additional controls and the ability to go through and select a background color for this section. There's a couple of React functions in here as well, or JavaScript functions, to be able to go through and when each of these fields change, setting the attributes on the block. The save function then goes through and saves the content of the block, and it actually renders it out into static HTML for the most part. So React is used on the editing side, but it spits out HTML on the front end. This does, we are still able to do some live updating React blocks as well. For example, you might want to pull in, I want to say you might want to pull in a Twitter feed, but no one's going to pay for the API for that one. You might want to pull in some other kind of live feed from elsewhere and put it in a live updating React block. So, but by default, it will give us static HTML. I'm not going to go through the code too much for this because if you want to know more, you can come and see me afterwards. Otherwise, if you just Google how to build a React Gutenberg block, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff in there. What does it actually give us? It gives me this. This is my custom block here. I have a title, I have content, I have a background color, and my page isn't playing nice with so many other things, but let's see if we can see anything here. Possibly not. If it's nice, we might get to see the content on here. Thank you very much for all of your patience today in participating with this interactive live pseudo coding of a WordPress theme. If you would like to know more, which is likely because I haven't had the chance to go through much today, if you would like to know more about building a WordPress theme, please come and see me because I can give you links to some on GitHub that do work. I promise they do work. So you can go through and use them as reference, or if you'd like to look at them further. I also have stickers as promised. So if you would like to come up and get we have custom stickers for anybody who would like to be a modern WordPress developer. Because we all know we're not real developers unless we have stickers on our laptops to prove it. Oh yeah, here we go. Here's some excellent. Yeah. Okay. WordPress does not like me today. However, I promise it is actually good. I promise it's good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend my holidays getting this to actually work again, and I'm going to write a blog post to prove that this does work in WordPress. No, actually, no. My blog post is not in My blog is not in WordPress. It will be in Markdown. But I will publish WordPress. Thank you very much for your patience in this hopefully entertaining and interactive session this evening. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will be hanging around for the rest of the conference as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.